I had always dreamed of taking an epic road trip across the United States to explore some of the country's most famous cities and natural wonders. As I started planning, I decided to focus my 2-week trip on a diverse range of destinations that would provide a mix of urban excitement and outdoor adventure. First, I mapped out a route starting in New York City, heading west to Chicago, Denver, and the mountains of Colorado, before dropping south to Arkansas and New Orleans. I planned to fly into New York and make a big loop before returning back east to fly home. With the route set, I have to work researching things to do in each place and planning a loose itinerary to maximize my time. For the big cities like New York and Chicago, I focused on must-see attractions like the Empire State Building and the Bean, leaving room to discover more once I arrived. For the national parks and nature destinations, I made sure to identify top hikes and outdoor activities ahead of time and book any necessary permits or rafting trips in advance. The final step was booking flights and accommodations. I opted for mostly Airbnb, is to get a more authentic and affordable experience. The key was planning 2 to 3 night stays in each spot to prevent feeling too rushed. By the time I was ready to depart, I could hardly contain my excitement for the incredible American adventure that lay ahead. The planning was done, and it was time for the real fun to begin. Stepping off the plane at JFK International Airport, I was immediately immersed in the energy and excitement that is New York City. As my taxi drove over the bridge into Manhattan, I caught my first glimpses of the iconic skyline, with the Empire State Building and Freedom Tower reaching up into the clouds. My first stop was Times Square, where I was awestruck by the blinking lights and bustling crowds. I couldn't believe I was standing in the middle of the place I had seen so often on TV and in movies. As I looked up at the massive, brightly lit billboards, I truly felt like I had arrived in the center of the universe. After grabbing an authentic NYC slice of pizza, I headed uptown to Central Park. Walking through the peaceful lawns and tree-lined pathways provided a nice respite from the chaotic energy of Midtown. I rented a rowboat and paddled out onto the lake, taking in views of the New York City skyline framing the park. By the end of my first day in New York, I had already fallen in love with the city. I was amazed by how the urban energy and greenery could coexist in such close proximity. With so many iconic sites checked off my list, I couldn't wait to see what adventures the rest of my trip had in store. After an exciting few days exploring New York City, it was time to pick up our rental car and head west towards Chicago. We grabbed our bags and took the subway to the rental car office, where we picked up our midsize SUV. It was strange getting behind the wheel again after relying on public transportation in NYC. Our first leg of the drive took us through Pennsylvania. We stopped for lunch in Pittsburgh and walked around the city for a bit to stretch our legs. As we continued into Ohio, Cleveland was our next stop. We checked out the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and grabbed dinner downtown before continuing on. At last, we reached Detroit in the evening. We found a hotel for the night and got an early start the next morning for the last stretch to Chicago. Driving along Lake Michigan was a beautiful sight, with the blue water stretching out to the horizon. After a long day on the road, the Chicago skyline came into view. We made it to the Windy City. We were excited to spend a few days exploring this world-class city next. Chicago was one of the highlights of my trip across America. As someone who loves food, architecture, and big city energy, the Windy City had it all. I started my visit with the iconic Willis Tower, once the tallest building in the world. The views from the sky deck on the 103rd floor were absolutely breathtaking. I could see the entire city sprawled out beneath me, with Lake Michigan glittering in the distance. Of course, I couldn't visit Chicago without trying its famous deep dish pizza. I stopped by Lou Malnati's, which is known for serving the best deep dish in town. The pizza was incredible, tons of cheese baked between thick, buttery layers of crust. I don't think I'll ever be able to eat regular pizza again after tasting the real thing in Chicago. After all that food, I needed to walk it off. So I spent the afternoon strolling along the lakefront trail, taking in the views of Lake Michigan and the Chicago skyline. The trail runs for 18 miles along the waterfront, and even though I only did a small section, it was rejuvenating to get some fresh air and take in the sights. Chicago really impressed me with its world-class museums, food, and architecture. I can't wait to return someday and explore more of what this amazing city has to offer. After exploring Chicago, it was time to head west to Denver, Colorado. I booked a direct flight from Chicago O'Hare to Denver International Airport. As we took off, I gazed out the window at the vast expanse of flat Midwest prairie transitioning into the majestic Rocky Mountains. I could feel the altitude change as soon as I stepped off the plane into the terminal. At over 5,000 feet above sea level, Denver has significantly less oxygen. I definitely felt short of breath as I walked through the airport. It took a day or two to fully adjust to the altitude change. Leaving the airport, the Rocky Mountains appeared enormous on the horizon. The skyscrapers of downtown Denver were nestled up against the foothills leading into the Rockies. After checking into my hotel, I drove up into the mountains and was awestruck by their beauty and enormity. I stopped at a scenic overlook and just stared in wonder at the snow-capped peaks stretching endlessly before me. I spent my days in Denver exploring the lively downtown, checking out breweries in the hip Reno district, and driving into the mountains whenever possible to get my fill of the hypnotizing Rocky Mountain views. The mile-high city fully lived up to its nickname and provided the perfect launch point for my Rocky Mountain adventures. After leaving the bustle of New Orleans, I headed west into the heart of nature. My first destination was the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. I spent a few days hiking through the lush forests and along rocky ridges overlooking deep valleys. The trails wound through thickets of oak, hickory, and pine trees. I caught glimpses of deer, raccoons, and even a black bear along the way. Next, I went whitewater rafting on the Buffalo National River. The Class 3 rapids tossed our raft up and down. Adrenaline pumped through my veins as we plunged through the surging waters. After flipping the raft in a particularly gnarly rapid, we emerged soaked but grinning ear to ear. Further west, I explored the canyons of Big Bend National Park in Texas. I hiked along the steep cliffs carved by the Rio Grande, keeping an eye out for bighorn sheep. After the exhilarating, active adventures earlier in my trip, Big Bend's quiet solitude and expansive views provided a peaceful contrast. As the setting sun bathed the canyons in a warm glow each evening, I felt a deep sense of awe and wonder. The diversity of landscapes across the United States is just incredible. This leg of my trip gave me an up-close look at some of the most spectacular wilderness areas. Testing myself on the trails and rapids created unforgettable memories. The journey continued as I headed south to Arkansas, driving through Memphis and into the lush Ozark Mountains. My destination was Hot Springs National Park, a beautiful protected area known for its natural hot springs and hiking trails. As I entered the small city of Hot Springs, the first thing I noticed was the inviting smell of the thermal waters in the air. Unlike sulfuric hot springs, these springs have a more pleasant, earthy odor. The downtown area contains ornate 19th century bathhouses that allow visitors to soak in the mineral-rich waters, which are believed to have healing properties. I spent the afternoon at one of the historic bathhouses, where I relaxed in a private thermal bath. The hot water soothed my sore muscles after so much travel and hiking. It was a meditative experience, being immersed in the natural spring waters. After my soak, I ventured into Hot Springs National Park to hike along the forested mountain trails. The park contains over 20 springs that feed the thermal waters throughout the city. As I hiked deeper into the forest, I came upon gorgeous waterfalls and cascades formed by the hot spring waters. Exploring the park gave me a greater appreciation for how this unique geologic landscape.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe and likes for more content. Thanks.